Welcome back to another author chat. I am here with Jason Marbach, the co-author of the Major Arcana, which came out in April and I really enjoyed. So let's dig into it. So, Jason, first up, what made you want to write a dual timeline novel?
Yeah, we actually didn't set out to, but it kind of evolved that way. We initially, when we were planning the book, we were discussing writing flashback scenes that covered some of the higher importance moments. But the more we talked about it, the more we thought, you know what? Let's just do this non-linear. Let's do two dual timelines going back and forth, and it actually we think worked out pretty well.
About how far were you in the writing process when you made the decision to go dual timeline versus the flashback?
Oh, it was very early. It was still in the discussion. In fact, I think it was before I even wrote the prologue, which was the first thing we got down on paper. I think we had already decided by then, and then it was a question of who's going to write what, because of course there are two of us writing the book. We were full-time co-authors, so I think we were pretty much already settled on that before the actual first draft was begun.
That's great. I am sure that would have been a lot of revision, but just what a great instinct to be able to figure that out before you even start writing, still you're in the planning phase.
Two heads really are better than one.
So next, I'm wondering, what advantages does writing a dual timeline novel give you?
Well, we realized pretty quick that the biggest appeal for us was that we could ratchet up the tension and deliver a 1-2 body blow of two climaxes at the same time as with the book progresses. We could have back to back, 1-2 haymakers. And that was very appealing. And then as we began writing more, we realized how much more depth and texture we could give Eric, especially Eric, but even the other characters who show up in both timelines, how much more depth and context we could give the modern version of the character with the past version of events, how much more we could show the change in them, the growth, or growth can be positive or negative, how much more we could contextualize and deepen the characterizations with very large periods of time between.
I totally agree. I'm imagining what this novel would be like if you did the flashback mode. In those, the flashbacks are meant to typically be short and they are meant to serve the one main plot. It works well in some cases, but you're absolutely right. You get way more context when you can spend a near equal amount of time in both timelines. And I really like the dual timeline, or the dual climax that was going on. Like, that was so gripping. I think I was reading it while I was on the train to work, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to be able to finish this before I go start work for the day, or I'm gonna be really struggling." And I think I was, live messaging with RW, like, as I was reading it. I was like, "No, not this." So, I totally agree, like, the payoff was extra big because you're having 2 things hit you at the same time, so I definitely see the value in that, and it was a really fun experience as a reader. So the next kind of a flip side, what was the most challenging part of writing a dual timeline novel?
Boy, there were a lot of challenges, still are. Really, I think there was a lot of skill that went into maintaining continuity and synchronization of narrative events, the way things happen, when, and how they affect the story around them, the ripples of the pebble hitting the water. But I think the most challenging part for us was synchronizing our voices. It's two different time periods. Even the main character is very different person, 19 years apart from each other. And of course, on top of all of that, in a meta textual sense, the book is being written by two authors who have their own writing voices. So, really trying to merge all of that, synthesize it into one coherent style, and then of course the transitions getting into and out of each time period change, all of that stuff presented a lot of challenge, especially in the editing phase. There's a certain school of thought that RW subscribes to more than I, but both of us do to an extent, of just get it down on the page and we'll fix it in post, right? Isn't that what people say in the movie
Yes.
business? So there is a certain point where even I, with all my deliberation and measuring twice and cutting once with the words, still have to you have to write the thing down. And then we'll work together. And again, two heads work better than one for us. So none of the challenges were insurmountable. Obviously, the book is sitting right here, but they were serious challenges that I've never experienced in any of my other writing projects before.
I think it's interesting that, you kind of have different approaches on the get it down on the page or deliberate. And I know a lot of authors do the deliberation. They want it to be perfect or as close to perfect as they can for a first draft. They feel like that's more efficient. But I have become more of the you just have to get a first draft down and you can edit later and you can fix it later.
Very valid.
It's really I'm imagining how both of those can lead to pros and cons where you wanna make sure that you have good stuff to start with, but you also need a little bit of malleability in order
Right.
for it to blend and sound like one cohesive voice by the end.
Yes, extremely so.
Cool. So getting into some of the characters, there's a lot of great characters in this story. So I love to ask all authors, which is your favorite character in the Major Arcana and why?
Would you think it was weird if I said my favorite character is the gray cat Eric sees in a bedroom?
No, I love I love all the animal characters.
If I didn't say that one, because he's only in the book for a short time. If not that one, then my answer would probably be Fitz. Fitz means a lot to me. I'm also really attached to Terry LaFleur and Clarence Daubron. But all the, I mean, the trite, cliche author answer. They're all my children, right? They all have their spot in my heart, even the bad ones.
Gotta love all of them, even the bad ones, even the cats. But I can absolutely see why, Fitz would be your favorite character. He's a special dude.
Yeah, I like him. Thank you.
So one thing that I, knew I wanted to talk to you about as soon as I knew we were going to do this, and the Major Arcana, we see male characters express a lot more emotional vulnerability, individually and with one another than you might typically expect. So I'm wondering what made you want to incorporate this into the book.
Boy, that's a good question. I'm a big believer in men being more in tune with their emotions, more just vulnerable in general. I think vulnerability and authenticity go hand in hand. And I think, there are a lot of cultural pressures on women and a lot of cultural pressures on men. One of the ones that men have is stoicism, stiff upper lip. What you feel and what you think generally should be buttoned up and kept in. And I don't think that's as prevalent an idea anymore, but it's still a big thing. So RW and I are pretty different on this front. He is fairly stoic, fairly buttoned up emotionally. He doesn't emote outward. He feels it all, but he doesn't emote outwardly as much. Whereas I am very much kind of a heart on my sleeve guy. I was raised to be stoic, but through years and years of effort, once I came to believe in my current ethos, become more vulnerable, more open. I think it's a really healthy thing. And I think that life forces us into those moments sometimes, and we find out who we really can trust, especially male to male, guy friends that you really can trust. Say, man, I'm having a really hard day. I feel like an imposter today. I feel like I do not deserve any of the good things that I have. And you can find out pretty quick who your real friends are that way. It's still hard to do, but I feel like writing a book like this gives you an opportunity to argue the ought and the is versus ought. I think it gives you an opportunity to show, hey, there's another way, guys. We can do this differently. But anyway, that interpersonal difference between RW and myself, it makes a very fertile mixing ground, if you will, that lets us examine the characters from lots of different contexts in ways that we wouldn't necessarily consider them otherwise, and adds a lot of richness and depth. I may be biased, but I really do think it's healthy for guys to be more open with their feelings, and I want to kind of show healthy examples of that when it's appropriate, when it's not shoehorned in there. I have seen some critiques of the book that say some of the dialogue feels unnatural, and it's not specific which parts, but I have to imagine dudes not acting the way some readers expect them to might be part of that. But I still think it's worth doing. I still think it's worth showing. I think that what gets described as the male loneliness epidemic in real life stems in large part from guys tending to believe, from societal pressure or whatever other factor, that they can't or shouldn't be authentic and genuine and vulnerable with one another. And I think that's bad for everybody.
It absolutely is, and art is a safe place to explore these things for people to challenge their perspectives as they're reading it, and if it makes them feel uncomfortable, if they are able to examine why, or if they feel like it's unnatural, they're maybe able to think critically about why does it feel that way. But what I really liked is in the book, like, these moments are coming at, without spoilers, like, really big, key, important moments in these people's lives. The stakes call for the emotional reaction that these male characters are having,
I think
and that just feels like if we didn't see that, it would be a character choice, and that would be fine, and that would be a story to tell. But I really like that we dig into the kind of messiness of these people working through these emotions, and they call it out. Like, they have times where they acknowledge that this isn't no normally the way that men would
Right.
act, and Eric, the main character, feels uncomfortable with these things. You guys are self-aware of what's going into here, and I think that's what makes the difference. It's very much earned.
No, I appreciate you saying that. That everything, like, there's two fundamental precepts that RW and I agreed on very early. Character is king, and everything, no matter how fantastical the story, what happens in the story should feel grounded based in the parameters and the reality of the world that the story happens in. So I appreciate you saying that, because that is like that is an organizing principle for us.
Yeah, and it absolutely pays off, especially if we consider the time frame. Like, you can tell the cultural shifts that are happening between the 19-year difference there. It's subtle because it's still the same person, Eric, the main character, but the differences are there. It's a fun exploration of that, so I'm glad we got to chat about it. So now that we've chatted about character, I want to kind of dig into one of the central themes and motifs of the story, which is the justice system. And I really love that we get to examine this through the guise of a thriller. We'll avoid spoilers for anyone listening. Might be hard, but we'll find a way. So the Major Arcana comments on the American justice system with the plot and especially with its ending. But what inspired this as a motif?
Well, the book was originally conceived. We've been working on this and all our other books kind of concurrently for around 5 years. But the book was originally conceived hot on the heels of Derek Chauvin's murder of George Floyd and the national protests that it sparked. And while we initially conceived the book as more of a simple detective mystery, once we realized that we were setting it in New Orleans because the tarot aspect and the other things like that, the major arcana and the history of policing in general, but especially in a place like New Orleans, we felt that we'd be failing if we didn't examine such weighty, current, and ongoing social issues as a relevant part of the story. RW and I are two white, cis presenting dudes. What's all this privilege for if we're not using it to amplify important topics and to have a conversation about it that perhaps other folks aren't getting the traction or attention on when they talk about it? We have a lot of POC characters in the book, and while we're cognizant of the pitfalls as two white guys writing lived experiences that we do not have and have no lived context for ourselves, uh, things that the POC community has been dealing with for decades upon decades, hundreds of years on this continent, we felt the conversation was too important not to do our very best to give it life and humanity.
Your answer is great that if we have privilege, we have to use it. We have to try our best. And, it's too important not to comment on.
Exactly.
So, jumping off of that, the Major Arcana shows a nuanced portrayal of the American justice system. So, I'm wondering, what did you keep in mind when you were writing this book to make sure that the final representation hit all the notes that you wanted to convey?
The book is set in a fictional world, but it's a fictional world that very closely resembles our real one. And it was important for me personally to inject as much real history into the pathos of the world and our characters as I could. Just like real life, our world's history, it's alive and it's breathing. It touches the lives of our characters. It drifts in and out of the story at times. And I wanted that to shine through in the writing. We both did. RW himself has a history degree. It's history is very important to both of us. And so it's an impossible to write an honest accounting of the relevant history in a good light. You can't write it honestly and show it as a good thing. You just can't. But it would be too easy, I think, to just, you know, portray it as mustache twirling evil as well. There's humanity and nuance in these conversations, and they matter because it's too easy for people who feel differently than you to write it off if you're just ACAB. ACAB is wonderful slogan, easy to say, and broadly speaking, easy to support, in my opinion. But it doesn't fix anything. If we're not acknowledging the humanity and the intentions of people involved, we're not accomplishing anything except making ourselves feel better, making ourselves feel morally superior. I think the conversation's too important to just make ourselves feel good. I think we need to have a real conversation. It would be a cop out, to just paint it all as, mustache twirling. That's no good. Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil in her book. Examination of especially systemic oppression and racism, we have to have the nuance and humanity, and it was important to RW and I both to keep centered while we were writing.
I think you're very right. Like, ACAB is a slogan, and a book is not a slogan. A book, you have hundreds of pages to explore the nuances and the history and the context and the characterization and explore the humanity and everything that's at stake because a conversation is too important to, try to summarize in a slogan, all opinions aside, that the way that we make progress is by understanding the other person's side and working together for a better world and justice and all of those things. But you're never going to get anywhere if you're not having the conversation. And I think that this book is an accessible way for people to have that conversation. There's a lot of different ins into this book. Like, you talked about the challenges of trying to write and represent POC characters when you're not POC yourself, but going through that effort allows more people more ins, to access a piece of art, a piece of literature. And there, by all means, there should be art and literature that is not accessible to every group, and that can be the point for sure, absolutely. But if you're trying to start or contribute to a conversation and find understanding, that kind of goes part and parcel with it.
Exactly.
Ideally minded. So I love to ask every writer who comes onto my author chats about their writing process because selfishly I learn a lot. And I think, a lot of the people listening to this are either avid readers or maybe future writers, aspirational writers, or current writers. So, the Major Arcana is a chunky boy. It's a long book.
All right.
Which makes sense. There's two timelines and you're talking about important topics.
It's really two books.
It is
It's
kind of
really
2 books at the same
yeah.
time, but it was great to do them at the same time rather than trying to do, like, one and then the other. That wouldn't have been nearly as, satisfying. But I'm wondering, since we do know that this was a longer book, was there anything notable that you had to cut from the final version, and why didn't it make the final cut?
You're right, it is a really long book, but it was a lot longer. First draft of this book is like 238,000 words. So we had to cut a lot because we knew even where it ended up around 200,000 words, we know 638 pages is a lot. It's luckily we had a lot of things that felt like they could go. We felt like they were all good, but we had a lot of it. For instance, in the book, without spoilers, there are some interspersed shorter chapters that are different POVs that happen during active murders rather than from the main character's POV. We had more of those. We had other named characters, people that the reader knows who did it horribly in the book. The further we get into it, more and more, you know, bad things keep happening. But it got to a point of diminishing returns, we thought, where it was kind of like, we've got a good amount of this. It feels good. It feels right. Some of these other ones can probably go. There was other stuff like police procedural things. We know a lot of people who really enjoy detective books, police mysteries, police thrillers. It's just like you read a John Grisham book for the courtroom procedural things, you know? A lot of people really enjoy that aspect, but in our book, you got two different timelines where they keep not catching the guy until late in the book, you know? We started calling them CSI scenes. A lot of the CSI scenes started to feel wheel spinny. Like, okay, we've done this. Come to the scene, interview people, nothing happened. We figure out MO. And it was all interesting, but there was just so much of it in the book that we thought we can streamline this and make it more effective. And then we started playing with some of the more chaotic elements that enter later in the book. And it's hard to dance around this without spoilers.
I know, isn't it tough?
Basically, we kind of started emphasizing different things in the story rather than the whodunit aspect. The whodunit aspect is still there, but the police procedural aspects, they didn't get less important, but other aspects became more important, and we wanted to kind of give equal space to both, so it allowed a lot of room to trim a lot of fat. Of course, I also lost my nickname that I gave Danny, but had a whole backstory about him having a misfire and the training range when he was at the academy, and everyone started calling him Squib, but we had to lose that because, yet another thing J.K. Rowling has ruined for me.
Yep. Just another one.
Yep.
There's so
Yep.
many things. But I mean, it's important to know as an author what doesn't need to be there. And like you said, it doesn't mean it's not good. And it doesn't mean that there's not someone out there that wants to see it, right? Sometimes I'm like, give me all of the deleted scenes. If I love something, I'll read anything that an author writes. And even if I know that it's making the overall thing longer, but I like
Yeah.
that you called them the CSI scenes because in romance, it's like the slice of life scenes where you're seeing the
Right.
friends just hang out, and sometimes you do need those, like, downturn moments as a little bit of a breather depending on the genre and depending on what's going on, depending on the pace of the book, but I think it's helpful, at least, that you were able to identify where things were just kind of going on a little bit too long, and
Right.
that's always an interesting thing that, like, I think about as I read books that are comparable to mine or as I'm writing mine, like, what do we not need to see? It doesn't mean it didn't happen,
Right.
don't need to see the character in, like, yet another class or yet another day at work or yet another day at sports practice, like, those things are all happening, going on, but in your case, there are people that, like, didn't end up getting murdered, like, I was talking to another thriller novelist in the last episode, and she's like, some people, like, survived just by nature of, like, the scene where they got killed in the end, like, didn't make it into the final book,
Yeah.
so sometimes you just have to be selective. Okay, so you're still on the spot regarding spoilers and avoiding them, but to the best of your ability, without spoilers, this book, we open up a lot of threads. Some get closed, some are left open for interpretation at the end of the novel. So I'm wondering, how did you decide what plot points to tie up and which to leave open-ended?
Well, like you said, without spoilers, right? I'm gonna give it the old college try. Yeah, this book is the opposite of a cozy mystery, right? There's a whole lot of things on a grand scale and a micro scale that are uncomfortable in reading this book, and one of the things that I think is uncomfortable by design is that not every question gets answered by the end of it. It's not a neat little package at the end because life's not a neat little package. We don't get all the answers right when we want them. So I will say that most or all of the hanging plot threads that we have at the end of the book do come back in subsequent novels. Luckily, part of this book taking nearly 5 years to complete for us was that we had plenty of time to finish at least first drafts of three subsequent novels, so we do already have a very good idea where this is all heading. The books, they are technically a series, although not traditional direct sequels. We're not picking up book two at the end of book one with the same characters in the same setting. It's more of a loosely connected string of stories in the same storytelling world, where characters and concepts and other elements will pop in later. If anybody out there has read one of my personal favorite authors, Terry Pratchett, his Discworld series is kind of like that, where there'll be like a couple of books in a row that are following Rincewind, and then later on in the series we're going to go write some books and follow Tiffany Aching for a while. But it's all happening on Discworld, and so there are books where death pops up, and death is in a whole bunch of Terry Pratchett books, and Rincewind pops up in other people's books. That's kind of how our stories are, in that ideas, things that happen, events, even the mention of a TV show that Eric and his girlfriend talk about possibly watching briefly in this book becomes a big fixture in book two, for instance. Things like that happen. I can confirm for sure that the gray cat and Thoreau, the old man in the overalls, will return in future books, as well as the concepts that we touched on but didn't really answer surrounding the Baxter family house out in the bayou. But it won't be book two. It's going to be after that. We got to have patience. We're still building things. We're going to have a nice, big, juicy payoff for this, but it's going to take a little patience for everybody to get there.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the rise of the interconnected standalone across a lot of different parts of fiction. We see it a lot in romance, the Ali Hazelwood Steminist series is, my counterpoint to the Discworld series. Two
Sure.
very different, pieces of literature, but you could enjoy them both. And I think it's really interesting that, those threads and those doors that are open that we'll see them later. I think it's a really fun nugget for people to come back to years later, be like, "Oh, I remember that thing." Or if they do a reread, that's one of my favorite things. If I am rereading a series, maybe
Yeah.
before like the next one and it gets published, you remember those things that you enjoyed that you missed the first time or something like that. So I think that's really fun. I'm excited to see where these go and learn more about the Baxter family house. I knew reading, I was like, "We're not gonna get all our answers there by the end of it," and, like, I really
It's too
wanted
big.
to, but I knew we weren't going to.
Yeah, it's I'm I am personally a huge rereader. In fact, it's kind of a problem. I when I really like something, I don't have to experience all the thrills of discovery like I did the first time I read it. I like to reread it to learn from the craft, to just appreciate and marinate in what the author was trying to do. So as a big rereader, it was very important to me. These books are going to be very rewarding to reread, especially after subsequent books come out. So in the hopes that my other fellow rereaders unite. Yeah, I really think it's going to reward that down the road, especially as more questions become answered, going back and saying, "Oh, so they didn't just pull that out of their rear ends; they were planning that." Okay, all right,
Yes, it's the best, right? When you know, like, "Oh, it really did, work out," or the package was meant to be that way. When I reread, it's usually in the fantasy genre, like,
right,
a little bit less in, like, the thriller type genre, but that'll be
right.
really fun because you kind of depending on how long it's been, you forget some of the details or depending on how much you remember about how the ending is, like, these characters will go in and do the, like, CSI scenes, and, like, that's not the big bad, so you'll be able to, like, focus on the other things that are into the novel because you remember, like, "Oh, okay, like, that's not the murderer." So you are able to pay attention and pick up on more of those, not because you're scanning or skimming or anything like that, just your brain kind of subconsciously knows, like, what details you don't need to pay as much attention to, and that kinda leaves more, like, resourcing to pick up on the others. Okay, last question here. I love ending on, kind of a fun note like this. If you were to give advice to somebody else who wants to write, like, a commercial fiction novel that incorporates serious themes like you did taking on the American justice system, what would you recommend?
Well, I I don't think a novel solves all the world's problems, and I don't think that I have the capacity to by myself to do that. But I do know that whatever the solution is, it's rooted in empathy. And I think the same is true for writing about these issues. Sounds trite, cliche. Y'all don't let your ears turn off when I say this, please, because really listen to it and think about it. But I would recommend focusing on speaking truth to power and always punching up, never down, right? We're never attacking people on the lower end, people that are struggling already. We're going after the people with the power who are gatekeeping access from other folks. We're punching up. Um, like I said, I know that sounds trite. Everybody says that, but I really think those things are really important. And if you are writing with the hope of incorporating allegory or even lessons, even proselytizing, if that's what you're into, something in your fiction that has to do with parallels to the real world, I would recommend research. I would recommend coming correct with your facts. It's important. You do all this research. You would not believe the amount of research I did into the history of Louis Armstrong Park and Audubon Park and other places like that in New Orleans. The history of the hospital that I mentioned that one of the characters is in briefly that the main character goes to visit. Uh, Things like that that don't necessarily show up. You know, it's like an iceberg, right? Like 1% of your research might actually make it into the book, but actually knowing that stuff, especially when you're trying to discuss important metatextual events and concepts, coming correct with your facts is important.
Absolutely agreed, and you can tell when an author has done the research and they know what they're talking about. There's just something about it where there's, like, a quiet confidence that says, "I know I've researched this." Those are 2 good pieces of advice, one kind of more, like, inspirational and one more tactical, but they're both really important to be able to pull that off.
Thank you. I agree. I think those are important.
Great. Well, thank you so much for jumping on and digging into the Major Arcana with us. If you are listening, I highly recommend you read it if you haven't already. Great read, tons of fun, really, as we said, really meaningful themes in here. Things, meant themes. Pronunciation is hard. Okay. And I did get enough sleep last night too, which is the crazy thing. Like, I always feel like awkward signing these off. I'm like, okay, bye
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do this. Well, for our list, you know what? I usually make a speech flub on like the intro, and I didn't this time. So I'm really proud of myself. Okay. I am We can do this. We can do this. So, listeners, thank you so much for. Oh, no, I need to thank you. Duh, first. Okay. I can do this. I promise. I am a real person and I only have my shit together like 80% of the way. Okay. Well, Jason, thank you so much for digging into these really, really important topics. I know I threw you some tough questions in there and really appreciate the, energy and you sharing with these readers and listeners. I hope that you check out the Major Arcana if you haven't. Jason, do you have anything you want to plug or anywhere people can find you online to stay informed of all your future writings?
I spend all my social media time on Blue Sky. It's not the best, but it's better than the alternatives. So I hope to see y'all on Blue Sky. You can find me at marbach.bluesky.social or bsky.so. Find people on basically it's just my last name, Marbach. You can find me on there. Also, of course, we have our indie imprint, Chaos Cat Creative. You can find on Blue Sky as well. RW is on there. That's where we spend most of our social media time. So hope to see y'all on there. Thanks for having me on the show. Love what you do. Appreciate it.